Greetings, friends from St. Francis. Welcome to week 3 of The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Last week I discussed a little bit about his life and thought I would pick up from there just to tell a little bit more of his life story before we go into the teaching of these letters. We found out last week that he was a military person injured in battle, came out as a broken man, found his way to the Carmelite friary and became a brother. One of the things that I failed to mention, if you look at the very first page, back from the very beginning of when we started here in the first conversation, it was pointed out that he had this vision in his mind where God spoke to him and his life changed. And it is the vision of a tree in winter. We can obviously relate to that right now. Being this Lent, you look at every tree and it's just the trunk and the empty branches. And he looked at one of those one day, came upon it and said, you know what? I see myself as that empty tree, as basically the barren, lifeless, stump that God has brought me to. But I also see that and know that in the spring there's going to be a beautiful green, flowing tree of life. And that gave him the inspiration of seeing that even though he was in this period of darkness and brokenness, that he could come out of it into a new person that God would make beautiful. It inspires us in Lent. We always do this Lent with the understanding that we're working toward the resurrection. Everything we do now is for that Easter morning. And so it's just good to put it in perspective a little bit that, especially sometimes, as we settle into Lent, it becomes a lot of doom and gloom, it seems like, and it's not. This is all a purpose for us. And seeing that vision, just seeing that tree and seeing the hope that comes in it, I think is inspirational. As he settled into his duties in the friary, he became, again, the main cook in the kitchen, worked his way up and became a cook. And spent most of his time there. As you know, back then, only the priests and the full religious orders were doing the 7 hours, liturgy hours during the day and full prayer routine. These brothers were basically, they were the servants. They were living there, serving them. And so while he had a little bit of prayer time in the morning, a little prayer time in the evening, he really wasn't participating in the full life of the church like a monk would or friar would. So he created his own little devotion in his own little space right there in the kitchen. And in that kitchen, God transformed him perhaps in a greater way than he could have if he had been down with the brothers singing and doing liturgy hours. So it's just inspirational to know that God has a plan and a call for each of us. Some of us are called the holy religious life. Some of us are called the daily life. Some of us are called a life of sacrifice and being in a very difficult circumstance. And anyway, God is present in all that. And so in his life, he created his own little chapel. He had a picture of Jesus, a wounded Jesus there that he would go to and pray in front of. And it really connected with him. And he had some beautiful, especially deep visions that came from that, similar to Carmelite Saint Teresa of Jesus, the Chief of Avila, had a very similar picture that she would go to that would ground her in just the sacrificial nature of Christ. So he was, as he went through this 10-year process, as I talked about last time, from this brokenness to this healing, that was mainly in that kitchen period when he was serving all day long. Get up before the crack of dawn to get everything ready and work well past dinner, putting everything away, a little bit of time to pray, and then back to sleep, and it starts all over again. And yet, in that period of time, he developed a 4-stage conversion. And basically, he went from this whole thing of forgiveness for his sins and the way he was and everything he had experienced up his life. And then he developed a profound gratitude to God for bringing him out of that and having him actually understand that God loved him and the value he had as a human. And that over time then developed a deep trust in God. The book talks a lot about trust and trusting in God. And again, that comes with the faith, the gift of faith that God gives us, but it also nurtures over time and creates this bond between us and God that we call trust. And then as he went on, he basically started what we would say rejecting all that is not God. So he basically said, listen, anything that's keeping me now, I'm on this mission, to unity with God, anything that's detracting me from God, whether it's talking about other people, being distracted by things that my daily routine, whatever it is, if it's not uniting me with God, then get it out of the way. And so that method and that process he's doing is just as applicable to us. And so as we go through our different prayers, obviously it's good always to give some prayer time to thanks and some prayer time for contrition and some prayer time for praise and worship. And then some of the asceticisms we talk about in Lent of giving up things that aren't good for us. The other thing that's fascinating about this period of time was this is in the 17th century when it was kind of like the new age of a lot of books were being written on spirituality, and it was a really active time in the development of spiritual growth. And so all around him, people were all focused on reading that next important masterpiece of how to advance your spiritual life. And he noticed that, and he would be in talking to these friars, the priests, and they would tell him this. He said, well, yeah, but what about the simple? And they would, yeah, you're right. It's all grounded in that very simple piece of loving God. And how do we miss that when we got so off into some of these higher things? And as crazy it is, pretty soon the priests started coming and staying over and helping him clean up from dinner and hanging around and talking and learning from him, actually, and conversing with him. And it says in the book that he actually became somewhat of a social center, that the people would come, the kitchen now, instead of the social area or the priest where the friars would go, they would come and actually hang out with Brother Lawrence just to be with God and learn from him. So it's just inspirational to have some of that context as we go into these letters. So I'll continue to kind of weave that through his life as we go through these letters. So basically this week we're doing the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th letter. And some very profound truths come out of his life and him overcoming this 10-year battle of maturing in faith. Of course, that's what we're trying to do. It says on page, in the fifth letter somewhere, it says, he was sculpting his soul. I love that, sculpting his soul. So it was basically a little bit of everyday chiseling away at, okay, what do I need to do today? How do I get closer to God? In a very simple sense. So when we think about sculpting, a lot of times it's very slow, it's very precise, but it's also not getting into too much of the higher forms of things. It's chipping away at the little things. And sometimes we wonder, how do we do great things? It's a little at a time. That's how these great sculptures came, a chisel at a time, not these major earthquake, earth-shaking movements, but actually a little bit at a time. So, and all the time he was conversing with God interiorly. It talks about in the 6th letter about him just basically having a dialogue with God and the peace that comes with that, especially in our daily struggles. That's something we can really grasp onto us. I'm sure a lot of us here have daily crosses that we bear with on our own life, our work life, our family life, societal issues, and we wonder just how do we get through some of those. And he basically says talking to God interiorly about it is a good way to do it. He says, God, what are you doing? What is happening? And letting God listening on how God can work through that with us. Meanwhile, though, dwelling, he says dwelling, and especially in the 7th letter, dwelling with God interiorly on it. You know, don't just, you know, talk to God and then just let it drop. Let God speak to you interiorly. This interior uniting with your divine indwelling is a very interactive experience. It doesn't. It takes a while to develop. Um, for a period of time, when you're going and discussing with God and your divine indwelling, you're doing all the talking. You haven't quieted yourself enough to listen, and so you get done. You say, "Well, I just talked to myself for half an hour." Well, that's okay. That's a step. At least you're acknowledging that God is there and you're trying. After a period of time, you'll find that you'll stop talking so much and learn to listen. Just pause a little bit in that, and God will use again first your lower form of your mind and reach your higher form of your intellect to start actually putting in the active messages that a divine indwelling is trying to reveal to you. That period of time is undetermined. For some people it's instant, some people it's years. So it's the thing I can recommend, and all the books tell you, is don't try to measure. Don't try to measure it. This isn't a recipe. This is a daily process of being with God, and God will lead you through in His time and way He wants to do it. The last thing in the final letter I think that's important to point out is that this is an important step to get from the lower form of your God-given faculty of the mind to the higher form, which is your intellect. So they're both, if I talked about the three faculties again, the memory, the intellect, and the will. The intellect is the daily, where we're at right now, what we're doing at this moment to advance ourselves toward God. And so he recommends that instead of letting your mind kind of wander away in prayer, he talks about that we have to train ourselves to dwell in His presence. I guess that's probably not hard for us to understand, but it's still good to have His reassurance that don't expect to just flip the page and think that you're going to be in unity with God. It's going to take some time to detach from the things that are preventing you from and distracting you from being with God. That just takes time. But also, just knowing as you're starting to pray, you'll get distracted. You'll be praying, and all of a sudden you'll think, I need to cut the grass, or I forgot to buy the butter. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're less holy or less prayerful or you're off track. It just means that that's where you're at, and that you're still working your way toward that period of time of being fully developed in finding that divine indwelling within you. So I hope that's helpful. It's we're right in the middle of the letters. We have one more week of letters, and then we'll keep moving on in his writing. So have a beautiful week of Lent, and we'll see you soon.